"No man is strong enough for me," said the Apache woman, until she met the cowboy. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The sun was setting over the vast desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wind howled through the dry, cracked earth, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust. This was the land of the Apache, a place of fierce warriors, ancient traditions, and unyielding pride. And it was here, in this unforgiving wilderness, that the story of Nehemina began. Nehemina was no ordinary Apache woman. She was a force to be reckoned with, known throughout the tribe for her strength, her skill with the bow, and her unshakable determination. Her reputation had spread far and wide, and many had come to challenge her, thinking that no woman could possess such power. But they were wrong. Nehemina had proven time and time again that she was not to be underestimated. She had fought off bandits, protected her people from invaders, and stood tall in the face of danger. To the men of her tribe, she was a symbol of strength, and to the outsiders, she was a mystery. It was said that no man could ever match her strength, and Nehemina wore that challenge like a badge of honor. But little did she know, her world was about to change. One fateful afternoon, as Nehemina made her way through the desert on horseback, she encountered a lone rider. The man was unlike any she had ever seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and rode with the confidence of someone who had seen countless battles. His clothes were simple, but there was something in his eyes that caught her attention. They were calm, steady, and unafraid. He did not speak as he approached her, but his presence alone was enough to make her pause. She had encountered many men before, but this one was different. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no desire to prove himself. He seemed to be watching her, studying her, as if he knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Nehemina narrowed her eyes, trying to make sense of this strange man. He was no Apache, that much was clear. His skin was pale, and his features were sharp, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. She had dealt with white men before, men who had come to her land seeking to take what was not theirs. But this one, this cowboy, was different. He did not carry the arrogance of the others, nor did he seem interested in fighting her. Instead, he watched her with a quiet intensity that made her wonder what his intentions were. As she rode closer, the cowboy spoke for the first time, his voice low and steady. "You're Nehemina, aren't you?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. Nehemina was taken aback. No one outside her tribe knew her name, not like this. She had not heard of this man before, and yet, he spoke as though he had been watching her for some time. Her instincts screamed at her to ride away, to leave this strange man behind. But something about his presence kept her rooted to the spot. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold and measured. The cowboy smiled, but it was not the smile of a man who sought to challenge her. It was a smile of respect, of understanding. "I've heard of your strength," he said simply, "but I wonder if you've ever faced a true challenge." Nehemina's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? She had faced countless challenges in her life, and none had ever broken her. She had never known fear, never known defeat. And yet, something in his words made her question everything she thought she knew. "I don't need a challenge from a stranger," she said, her voice hardening. "I've faced enough in my life." But the cowboy did not back down. He met her gaze with a steady, unwavering look. "Then prove it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a challenge. "Prove that no man is strong enough for you." Nehemina's eyes flashed with anger. Who did this man think he was, challenging her like this? She was Nehemina, daughter of the Apache, warrior and protector of her people. She had nothing to prove to anyone. And yet, something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, made her hesitate. Could this be the challenge she had been waiting for? I know you're wondering if this cowboy can back up his words. Nehemina was too, but she would not let herself show hesitation. No, she had faced every trial life had thrown her way. Nothing would break her now. For a long moment, the two of them stood facing each other. The wind kicked up, dust swirling between them, a soft reminder of the harshness of the land they both called home. She saw something in the cowboy's eyes, something she hadn't seen before, a glimmer of understanding, but also a quiet confidence. He wasn't here to fight her for her land, or her people, or her reputation. He was here to test her, to see if she truly was as strong as she claimed. And as much as she hated the idea, she felt something stir inside her. A challenge. An opportunity. A chance to prove, he said. Across the river and back. The first one to cross wins. Nehimina's eyebrows shot up. A race? Was that really all? She had outrun her enemies. Her family had crossed the mountains in the dead of night to escape danger. She knew this land better than anyone. He had no idea what he was asking for. But there was something about the simplicity of it that intrigued her. He wasn't asking for bloodshed, just a test of speed and skill. "You're on," she said. Without another word, they spurred their horses forward, and within moments, the sounds of pounding hooves filled the air. Nehimina's heart raced with excitement. This was no ordinary race. It was a battle of wills. She could feel the weight of the cowboy's presence behind her as she pushed her horse harder, the muscles of the animal straining beneath her as she urged it faster. She glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of him. He wasn't far behind. He was good, that much was certain. But Nehemina was faster, stronger. The river was coming up ahead, and she could already feel the cool spray on her face as they neared it. She leaned forward, urging her horse even faster, knowing that if she could make it to the river first, she could claim victory. But then, just as they reached the water's edge, something unexpected happened. The cowboy pushed his horse to the side, angling it toward a narrow gap in the rocks along the riverbank. Nehemina's eyes narrowed. She had never seen that path before, but he seemed to know exactly where he was going. She didn't hesitate. Her instincts kicked in, and she followed him, not wanting to be left behind. But as they reached the halfway point, she realized it was a trap. He wasn't just racing. He was testing her. The gap was getting smaller, and the path was growing more treacherous by the second. She could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on her, but she refused to back down. Nehemina pushed her horse harder, her breath coming in sharp bursts as she navigated the rocks. She had always relied on her strength, but now it was more than that. She had to use her mind as well, thinking faster, moving quicker. The finish line was in sight. She could see the cowboy, ahead of her now, his horse galloping toward the shore. But Nehemina wasn't about to let him win. She gritted her teeth, giving one final push as they neared the riverbank. In the last moment, she threw all caution to the wind, steering her horse at full speed into the water, aiming for the shore with everything she had. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her final move, feeling the cold water splash against her legs. She could see the cowboy's surprised face as she shot ahead of him, her horse surging toward the finish line. Nehemina crossed the line first, her chest heaving with effort. She had won, but it wasn't just about victory. It was about proving something to herself. She had faced the challenge and overcome it. And she could see now that this cowboy, this stranger, wasn't just another test. He was something more, a part of her journey, something she didn't fully understand yet, but something that would change her forever. She turned to face him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You're not as bad as I thought," she said, her voice low but filled with a new respect. The cowboy nodded, his eyes meeting hers with the same quiet understanding he had shown her before. "Maybe you're not either," he replied. And in that moment, Nehemina knew that this was only the beginning. I know that Nehemina's victory over the cowboy in the race had been hard fought, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much deeper, something neither of them fully understood yet. The evening had fallen over the desert, and the wind carried the whispers of a past that both of them tried to escape. Nehemina stood by the riverbank, her heart still racing from the challenge. She couldn't deny the feeling of something new stirring inside her, a connection, a spark of curiosity, maybe even something more. She had won, but at what cost? What did this man mean to her now? And more importantly, what did he think of her? The cowboy, whose name she still hadn't asked, was riding back toward her slowly, his eyes steady on the path ahead. He was trying to act casual, but she could see it in his posture, the slight tension in his shoulders, that he wasn't unaffected by their encounter. As he approached, Nehemina held her ground. She didn't know why she expected him to speak first, but he did. "Guess I underestimated you," he said, his voice low and sincere. His tone was warm, not like someone who had just been defeated, but like someone who had come to appreciate what they had witnessed. Nehemina didn't respond immediately. She had never been one to make small talk. But something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, made her feel like they had crossed a line that could never be undone. For the first time in years, she was uncertain. "Why did you push me like that?" she asked, her voice rough but curious. "You knew I would beat you." The cowboy gave a small smile, his eyes locking with hers. "I didn't know," he replied. "But I had to find out. You never know your own limits until you're tested, Nehemina. And it's the same for both of us. I've never met anyone like you. You're not just strong. He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "You're something else." Nehemina looked away, her eyes scanning the horizon. The truth was, she didn't know what to make of him either. He wasn't like the other men who had come before him. He wasn't a threat to her land or her people. But that didn't mean he was entirely harmless either. She couldn't help but wonder what he wanted from her. "Are you going to stay here?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. It felt vulnerable, and she immediately regretted it. The cowboy nodded, his face serious now. "For a while, if you'll have me. I want to learn. About you, about your people. I'm not here to steal anything. I'm here to offer something. I don't know what yet, but I want to find out." She paused, her heart hammering in her chest. The words didn't come easily, but she had never backed down from a challenge, not once in her life. And maybe, just maybe, this was the biggest challenge of all. "I can't promise anything," Nehemina said quietly. "But if you stay, you will learn. And when you learn, you will understand." The cowboy didn't say anything more. He just nodded and dismounted from his horse. They stood there, side by side, watching the last rays of the sun disappear behind the mountains. In the distance, the sound of drums echoed faintly on the wind, the sound of her people preparing for the coming night. Nehemina knew that this was more than just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of something that could change everything. She just didn't know how yet, but she would find out soon enough. The cowboy stepped closer, but Nehemina didn't flinch. He had already proven himself to her in ways that no one else had. And for some reason, that made her heart beat a little faster. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she was curious to find out. "Tomorrow," he said, breaking the silence, "I'll help you with the horses. I don't know much about them, but I've learned a thing or two along the way." Nehemina looked at him, her eyes softening just a fraction. "I'll hold you to that," she said with a faint smile. As the stars began to appear above them, Nehemina realized something. The cowboy wasn't just a stranger anymore. He had become a part of her story, and whether she wanted it or not, that story was just beginning. She had no idea where it would take them, but for the first time in years, she was willing to find out. It had been days since Nehemina and the cowboy, now known to her as Royce, had made their uneasy truce. The bond between them had grown in unexpected ways. He had kept his word and helped with the horses, and Nehemina had begun to see a different side of him. His skills with the animals were impressive, and he never backed down when it came to learning the ways of her people. But something still troubled her. She had never allowed herself to rely on anyone before, and now, here she was, depending on this outsider for more than she cared to admit. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain. The storm was coming, just like the one that had once swept her family away. The clouds grew darker by the minute, and the pressure in the air was palpable. Royce stood at the edge of the campfire, his eyes scanning the horizon. Nehemina joined him, her gaze following his, though she knew the landscape well. It was the skies that unsettled her now. She could feel the storm coming, not just from the weather, but from something deeper. Something inside her was stirring, and it wasn't the wind. Royce turned to her, his eyes narrowed. "We need to move the herd to higher ground before it hits," he said, his voice steady, as if this was just another challenge to face. Nehemina nodded, but her mind wasn't on the herd. It was on him, on what he meant to her, and what she meant to him. "We'll move them tonight," she said, "before the rain starts to fall." The herd was spread across a wide valley, grazing peacefully beneath the red and orange sky. But Nehemina knew better than to trust the calm before a storm. Her people had learned long ago to read the signs, and this storm was going to be fierce. It wasn't just the cattle that needed shelter, it was her heart, too. As they moved the herd together, Royce's presence felt more like a constant pull at her thoughts. He had become a part of her life in ways that she didn't want. He was a man who didn't ask questions, who didn't push her boundaries. And yet, somehow, his quiet confidence had found a way to break through her walls. They worked in silence as the storm grew nearer, the air thick with tension. The wind howled through the trees, and the first drops of rain splattered on the ground. They could feel the storm coming, its raw power building with every passing second. It was as if nature itself was pushing them closer, forcing them to confront something neither of them wanted to face. As the herd was secured in a makeshift corral, Nehemina and Royce stood side by side, watching the storm take over the sky. The rain began to pour, but it wasn't the wetness that bothered her. It was the way the world seemed to disappear around them. The storm made everything feel small, like nothing else existed except for the two of them. The lightning cracked through the sky, illuminating the land around them in a flash of brilliant white light. And in that moment, Nehemina felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Fear not of the storm, but of what was growing between them. Royce stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers in the darkness. Nehemina froze, her breath catching in her throat. The warmth of his touch sent a shock through her, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never allowed herself to feel vulnerable. She had never allowed anyone to get close enough to see the cracks in her armor. But now, standing here in the midst of the storm, she felt them. She felt the walls she had spent years building start to crumble. Royce's voice was low, almost lost in the wind, but she heard it clearly. Nehemina. He didn't finish the sentence, and she didn't need him to. She already knew. They were standing on the edge of something they both feared, but neither of them could pull away. The storm raged around them, but all Nehemina could focus on was the man standing beside her. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. The storm had passed, leaving only the aftermath in its wake. The air was thick with moisture, the scent of wet earth and pine lingering in the cool breeze. The lightning had faded, and the clouds began to part, revealing a sky full of stars. But Nehemina couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just the storm, it was the quiet, the stillness between her and Royce. She had felt something stir in her heart earlier, but now, standing there in the damp night air, she wasn't so sure. She had spent her whole life protecting herself from emotions that could weaken her, from ties that could bind her. And yet, Royce had found a way into her world without her permission. It frustrated her. But more than that, it scared her. She had known loss, had seen her people endure hardship after hardship. She couldn't afford to be weak, not even for a moment. But as Royce's eyes met hers, there was no denying the bond that had begun to form between them. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, soft in the quiet of the night. Nehemina nodded, though the words didn't come as easily as they once did. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady, but the uncertainty lingered. Royce took a step closer, closing the gap between them. "Nehemina," he said, his voice low, "you don't have to do this alone." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just a man offering help. He was offering his presence, his support, something she had never allowed herself to want. And that scared her more than anything. "I'm used to being alone," she said, her voice tight. "It's the only way I know how to survive." Royce's gaze softened. "I understand," he said quietly. "But you don't have to. You don't have to be alone anymore." The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, Nehemina couldn't speak. She had never been the kind of person who needed anyone. She had built her life around her independence, her strength. But now, standing here in the moonlight, feeling the weight of his words, she wondered if maybe she had been wrong all this time. Could she truly let someone in? Could she trust him, trust herself, enough to take that leap? Royce stepped back slightly, giving her space, but his presence still felt overwhelming. "I know you're strong," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "But even the strongest people need help sometimes. You don't have to do everything on your own." Nehemina didn't know what to say. The truth was, she didn't know what to feel anymore. She had spent so long fighting, so long pushing others away, that she wasn't sure how to let anyone in. She had never allowed herself the luxury of needing someone, and now that Royce had given her that option, she was unsure of what to do with it. But as she looked at him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than surviving. Maybe there was a chance for something deeper, something real. She had fought so hard to keep her heart closed off, but standing here with Royce, she felt it crack open just a little. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I want to try. Royce smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made her heart race. That's all I'm asking, he said softly. We'll take it one step at a time. Nehemina nodded, the weight in her chest easing slightly. She didn't know what the future held, or where this unexpected connection with Royce would lead. But for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. As they stood together, side by side, the night seemed a little less lonely, the world a little less daunting. They didn't need words to understand each other. The silence between them was enough. And for the first time in her life, Nehemina realized that it wasn't weakness to lean on someone. It was strength, true strength. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone else help her carry the burden. The stars above them twinkled brightly, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. Nehemina and Royce were just beginning their journey together, and though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: neither of them would have to walk it alone. The days following the storm felt different. The air was heavy with unsaid words, but it was the kind of silence that allowed both Nehemina and Royce to breathe a little easier. They continued their work with the herd, tending to the animals, securing the land, and doing what needed to be done, but the bond between them had shifted. Nehemina could feel it in the way he looked at her, the way they worked together, their movements syncing like a well-rehearsed dance. It wasn't just about the herd anymore. It was about something more, a connection that neither of them had expected. But just as the land had its seasons, so did their relationship. And the season of calm was about to come to an end. It was late in the afternoon, the sun low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the camp when a rider approached in the distance. Nehemina's sharp eyes caught sight of the lone figure, a cloud of dust rising behind them. Her instincts immediately went on alert. The rider wasn't one of hers. Royce noticed her tense posture and followed her gaze, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his knife. "Who is it?" he asked quietly, his voice low but carrying an edge of concern. Nehemina's eyes narrowed as the rider grew closer, the figure slowly coming into focus. The rider was tall, his silhouette unmistakable. "It's someone I know," she said, though the words didn't carry the reassurance she had hoped for. The rider pulled up to their camp and dismounted with a swift, practiced movement. He was older, dressed in weathered clothing that marked him as a traveler of many roads. His face was familiar, too familiar. Nehemina recognized him instantly. It was her uncle, a man who had once been a part of her tribe but had long since left it behind. His name was Keanu, and he had always been a complicated figure in her life. He had chosen to walk away from the tribe when things had gotten too difficult, too complicated. Nehemina had never understood why, but she had never asked. Now, standing before her, his presence carried a weight that neither of them was ready to confront. He didn't smile when he saw her. His expression was serious, his eyes hard as stone. "Nehemina," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "It's been a long time." "Too long," she replied, her voice cold, guarded. She didn't know how to feel about his sudden appearance. "What brings you here?" Keanu looked over at Royce, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he didn't acknowledge him. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone firm. "There's trouble coming, and it's bigger than anything you've faced before." Nehemina stiffened, her posture turning rigid. "What kind of trouble?" Keanu took a deep breath, clearly hesitant, but he pressed on. "There's a group of men, outsiders, headed this way. They're looking for something. I don't know exactly what, but they're ruthless. I've seen the way they operate." "What do they want with us?" Nehemina asked, her voice barely a whisper, though the tension in her chest told her she already knew the answer. Keanu hesitated again before answering. "They're looking for land," he said, his voice lowering. "They'll stop at nothing to get it. They've been pushing through the territories of smaller tribes. And now, they've set their sights on yours." Nehemina's heart dropped. The land. Her people's land. The land she had sworn to protect. It was all she had left, and now it was being threatened by outsiders once again. She glanced over at Royce, who was watching the exchange with a quiet intensity. He had seen the same thing Nehemina had, a man who had abandoned his people, only to return now when danger was knocking on their door. Nehemina looked back at Keanu, her expression hardening. "Why are you telling me this now?" she demanded. Keanu met her gaze, his face unreadable. Because, he said slowly, I don't want you to make the same mistakes I made. I left when I should have stayed, and now I'm paying the price. I'm telling you this because I don't want to see you lose everything. His words hit her like a blow, and for the first time in years, Nehemina felt a flicker of doubt. But only for a moment. She couldn't afford doubt. Not now. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice hardening. Keanu's gaze softened for the briefest moment. You have a choice, he said quietly. You can fight them, or you can give them what they want. Nehemina's chest tightened. It wasn't a real choice. There was no way she would give up her land, no matter the cost. The fight was coming, and it would be one that would test her, that would test all of them. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Royce stepped forward then, his voice steady. We'll fight. Nehemina turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of surprise. She hadn't expected him to speak up, but there was no mistaking the determination in his voice. He was with her, and she realized, for the first time, that she wasn't as alone as she thought. The path ahead was dark, and the storm that had just passed was nothing compared to the one they were about to face. But Nehemina wasn't afraid anymore. She had her people. She had Royce. And together, they would fight to protect everything that mattered. The tension in the air had never been so thick. The days after Keanu's visit were filled with preparation. Nehemina and Royce worked tirelessly to organize the tribe and secure the land. They moved the animals, reinforced the defenses, and watched as the horizon slowly darkened with the promise of danger. The group of outsiders Keanu warned her about had yet to arrive, but Nehemina could feel the storm brewing. The warning had struck a chord deep within her, and now the weight of her responsibility rested heavily on her shoulders. As the sun set one evening, Royce came to her, his expression serious. We need to talk, he said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. Nehemina nodded, following him to the small campfire they had set up. The warmth from the flames cast long shadows over the ground, but there was no warmth in her heart. She had always carried the burden of leadership alone, but now with Royce by her side, it felt like a partnership she had never known. Still, there was something about this fight that made her feel more vulnerable than she had ever been. Royce sat down beside her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. They're coming, he said, breaking the silence. Nehemina didn't flinch, but the weight of the words settled in her chest. Yes, she replied, her voice quiet, I know. But we'll be ready for them. Royce looked at her, his expression softening. You don't have to do this alone, Nehemina. I've got your back, no matter what. She turned to him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the depth of what they had been building together. He wasn't just a man by her side. He was her equal, her partner. And that made all the difference. I know, she whispered. But I have to do this for my people. Royce nodded. And I'll be here, every step of the way. The next morning, the tribe gathered around the central fire as Nehemina addressed them. Her voice rang out strong and clear, but her mind was heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. They will come, and they will try to take what belongs to us, she began. But we will not let them. We will stand together, and we will fight for our land, for our people. No one is going to take what we've fought for. The warriors around her nodded, their faces set with determination. But there was a quiet tension in the air. Nehemina could see it in their eyes, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. We are strong, and we will show them that we are not to be underestimated, she continued, her voice rising with conviction. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of our children, for the survival of our people. We will not bow to anyone. Her words were met with nods of agreement. But Nehemina could feel the weight of the burden settling on her again. This wasn't just about land. It was about survival. It was about protecting everything they had built. And in the pit of her stomach, she knew that the fight was only beginning. That afternoon, they moved into position, setting up ambush points and watching the horizon closely. The wind had picked up, a sign that something was coming. Nehemina felt it in her bones. This would not be an easy fight. But she had no choice but to see it through. As night fell, the sound of horses could be heard in the distance. The group of outsiders had arrived. Nehemina's heart pounded in her chest as she and Royce stood side by side, looking out over the campfire at the approaching riders. They're here, Royce said, his voice calm but firm. Nehemina nodded, her gaze hardening. Get ready. This is it. The tribe's warriors moved into position, each one ready for what lay ahead. Nehimena's mind raced, but her body remained steady. She had faced countless challenges in her life, but this was different. These men were not like the others she had fought before. They were ruthless, driven by greed, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The first rider came into view, followed by a small group. They were armed, their eyes scanning the area as they approached. Nehimena's hand tightened around the hilt of her blade, her eyes locked on the leader. This was it. The fight for their future had begun. Royce stepped up beside her, his presence a reassuring strength. Let's do this, he said, his voice low but determined. Nehemina nodded, feeling the fire inside her ignite once more. They would stand together, and they would fight to the very end. The battle was about to begin, and there would be no turning back. This was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. The first clash came quickly, faster than anyone expected. Nehemina stood at the front of her warriors, her eyes locked on the approaching riders. The wind carried the distant sound of hooves, getting louder with every passing second. She had prepared herself for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw urgency of it. The strangers were here, and they were coming fast. The leader of the outsiders rode ahead of his men, a tall figure with a cruel grin on his face. His eyes scanned the camp, and for a brief moment, Nehemina could see the arrogance in his gaze. He thought they were weak. He thought they would surrender. He was wrong. We don't want trouble, the leader called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield. We only want what's ours. You have something we need. Nehemina's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. You will not take what is ours, she called back, her words firm and full of conviction. This land belongs to the Apache, and it always will. The leader's grin faded, replaced by a sneer. Then you'll die defending it, he said, and with that, he drew his sword. The battle erupted in an instant. The sound of swords clashing, arrows flying, and war cries filled the air. Nehemina moved like a whirlwind, her blade flashing in the dim light of the early morning. Her warriors followed her, fighting with the same ferocity and determination. Royce was by her side, his eyes scanning the field as he fought off the invaders. Nehemina had never felt more alive, more focused. She could hear the clash of metal and the shouts of the enemy, but all she could see was the fight ahead. Every move was calculated, every strike precise. She had trained for this her whole life, and now it was time to show the world what the Apache were made of. As the battle raged on, Nehemina's thoughts kept returning to the leader of the outsiders. She had to face him. She couldn't let him take their land, not after all they had fought for. Her gaze locked onto him across the battlefield, and she began to move toward him, cutting down anyone who dared to stand in her way. The leader noticed her approach, his eyes narrowing as he drew his sword. You think you can defeat me, Apache? He shouted. I've defeated entire armies. You're nothing. Nehemina's heart beat faster. His arrogance only fueled her resolve. She wouldn't let him desecrate her land, her people. She wouldn't let him win. With a battle cry, she lunged at him, her sword meeting his in a clash of steel. The sound was deafening. For a moment, they were locked in a deadly dance, each trying to overpower the other. Nehemina's muscles ached with the force of the battle, but she refused to give in. The leader was strong, but he was sloppy. He underestimated her. She saw an opening and took it. With a swift move, she knocked his sword from his hand and knocked him to the ground. The leader gasped, shock and disbelief flooding his face. You, he began, but Nehemina wasn't listening anymore. She raised her sword high and brought it down in one swift, decisive stroke. The leader's life ended with the sound of steel cutting through flesh. The battle around her slowed, and for a moment, everything went silent. The invaders, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. Nehemina stood over him, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She was covered in dirt and blood, but she stood tall. She had fought for her people, for her land, and now they were victorious. The remaining invaders began to retreat, the sight of their fallen leader sending fear into their hearts. Nehemina watched them flee, but she didn't lower her sword. She wasn't going to let them come back. Royce joined her, his face grim but proud. It's over, he said quietly. We won. Nehemina nodded, but there was no satisfaction in her eyes. She had won. Yes, but at what cost? The bodies of the fallen lay scattered across the battlefield, both Apache and invader alike. The land was stained with blood, and Nehemina couldn't help but wonder how much more of this they would have to endure. She turned to the warriors around her, her heart heavy with the weight of their sacrifice. "We will bury our dead," she said, her voice steady, "and we will rebuild. This land belongs to the Apache, and it always will." The warriors nodded, their faces filled with the same determination that had led them to victory. Nehemina knew the fight wasn't over. It never truly was. But for now, they had won. They had defended their land, their people, and their way of life. And that, for now, was enough. The days following the battle were quiet. The sun had set on the horizon, painting the sky with deep purples and fiery reds as Nehemina stood with Royce at the edge of their land, overlooking the valley they had fought so hard to protect. The aftermath of the battle weighed heavy in the air, but there was peace now, a fragile peace that hung between the moments of victory and the uncertainty of the future. The tribe had buried their dead, both Apache and invader alike, honoring their sacrifices. Nehemina had led them through the most difficult battle of her life, and though the victory felt hollow, it was a victory nonetheless. The land remained theirs. As the sun dipped lower, Royce turned to her, his face thoughtful. "You've done it," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of admiration. "You've protected your people, your land." Nehemina glanced at him, her eyes weary, but her gaze steady. "We've done it," she corrected him, her voice quiet but resolute. "I couldn't have done this without the strength of my people, without you." Royce smiled, his eyes meeting hers with a tenderness that caught her off guard. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the world between them, but also the undeniable bond that had grown over the past few weeks. They had fought side by side, shared moments of doubt and strength, and now, they shared the quiet aftermath of it all. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I think you're right. This land, this fight, it's not just yours. It's all of ours. And I'm proud to stand with you." Nehemina's heart beat a little faster at his words. She had never let anyone get this close before. She had never allowed anyone to truly see her, to see the fear and the scars beneath the surface. But Royce had earned that place, in ways she had never expected. She had never believed in the kind of love that required vulnerability, but in this moment, standing on the edge of the world with him beside her, she began to see it differently. "What now?" Royce asked, his voice full of quiet curiosity. "Now, we rebuild," Nehemina replied, her gaze firm. "We honor the dead and take care of the living. And we prepare for whatever comes next." Royce nodded, his expression serious but calm. "I'm with you, Nehemina. Whatever comes next, I'm with you." She looked at him, her heart full of unspoken emotions. She had spent so long guarding herself from the world, from love, from connection. But now, she realized, there was no need to stand alone. Royce had proven that he was more than just an outsider. He was a part of her life, a part of her people. The storm had passed, but new challenges lay ahead. The world was uncertain, and the future was never guaranteed. But for the first time, Nehemina felt like she wasn't walking the path alone. She had her tribe. She had Royce. And together, they would face whatever came next, standing strong, side by side. As the stars began to twinkle above them, casting a soft glow on the land, Nehemina took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything settle into place. This was her home. This was her family. And no one, no matter how powerful, would ever take that from her. The fire in her heart burned brighter than ever, not just for her people, but for herself, for the future she would build with those she loved. The fight had been won, but the journey was just beginning.